Hi and hello and welcome to episode 64 of Going Over. I, of course, am Fred Sloan. Alongside me is, at least my new professional companion. That's Joe Galli. He is the voice of the NWA, the National Wrestling Alliance. Joseph, welcome to the show, friend.
Thanks for having me on. The show's called Going Over, and I don't think I've ever gone over in my life. So, I'm usually the one staring down, looking up at the lights.
Well, it's a fun terminology in the world of pro wrestling, right? Because like you and I are familiar, we live in the world, but we have the terrestrial listeners here in Albuquerque, and all the fun cast-off listeners we get from people that actually enjoy good wrestling shows. And what it is, it's getting a reaction, right? It's not always a cheer, it's not always a jeer. It could be either, and it often a combination of those things, depending upon how you present your character. But it's about being over with the audience. It's about getting people out there to recognize your talents, and that's kind of where we went with the name. Was, can we get anyone to recognize us? And some people do. So how fortunate we are.
Ready to rock and roll. I love it. This is fun. Thanks for having me on. I love having conversations.
Well, this is fun, right? So we, obviously we've been working alongside a lot of NWA talent here at Duke City Championship Wrestling for about a year ago. I don't know even how much of the origin story so I'll smarten you up a little bit. So obviously I work for WWE as well, right? So I do press conference stuff, and I'm that guy. So I'm out at the Royal Rumble in Tampa a year ago, and my number one goal is meet Brian Idol. Like, I'm going out to Tampa. I'm going to meet the guy who's working the territories for the NWA, and I'm going to sit down and say, hey, we started a thing. It needs some help. Would you have interest in helping me? I tell you what, brother, I don't know if there's a more involved mind, a more brilliant mind, a more creative mind than Brian Idol in the world of pro wrestling. And his warmth and kindness has just been a big part of our direction. Can you talk a little bit about him and for our audience out here, what he is to the world of pro wrestling?
It's interesting because, what you say it's so accurate, especially when you talk to a lot of people that work with him so much.
Yeah.
And then when you watch, Billy Corgan's Adventures in Carneyland, now available on Roku, Peacock, and various other places. Cheap plug in there. He's kind of portrayed as this bumbling villain. And he really isn't. I mean, the guy, I think he posted on Facebook a few weeks back, I've been in wrestling 20 years and forgotten more about the sport of professional wrestling than most people will know in their lifetime. And I don't think he's blowing smoke in that. I think he truly believes that. And you could see that in the acumen that he has in him, not only as our national promoter, but also in the way that he runs FTW, one of our, not an official territory, but definitely our affiliate promotion down in Tampa that we use. And a lot of great students, a lot of great people go through that system as well, with him as a trainer and Natalia Markova as a trainer. And so, he's a great guy, and he's opened a lot of doors to, Duke City, now, Duke City with NWA New Mexico, as well as a bunch of other places. We've got a lot of big announcements that we're going to be making about some shows that we're going to be doing on the West Coast, and we wouldn't be doing those without Brian Idol getting our foot in the door in some of these places. And I think it's going to be an exciting place for, people to see the NWA expand and to do something, not as traditional. Most people think, all right, you're going to have a wrestling show, you have an arena, whether it's, a small bar or it's a big stadium, you have your wrestling and you go. When we go a different route, we've worked with during Pumpkins concerts and festivals and things like that. And Brian Idol's been really important. He's been a big part of that. And part of that's, he's got a great relationship with Billy. I think he's not just an employee. He's like really a friend of his. And so that connection and being able to talk to the boss that way, and being able to meet, people like yourself and make the connections that throughout the sport of professional wrestling, which is vast. I mean, throughout the whole country, throughout the whole world. And, Brian's been doing it a long time. And so it's allowing us to grow in a way and at a rate that I don't think we really expected to.
Well, and what's interesting about, at least in my opinion, taken away from that point, is you're talking about different territories, you're talking about different venues, you're talking about different styles, and pro wrestling is ice cream, right? Like, there's a million different flavors. And I think for certain, he's a guy who's helped me understand that I don't have to do it the way that the NWA does it with their television studio show. I don't have to do it the way that the NWA does it. Although I'm like, if I were able to put on a program at the Chase in St. Louis, like the amount of heritage and celebration I would have for that, the way that you guys did it was 75. Like the way that you guys do it is the example for the class. We can do it our way. Like a bar show can do it their way. Like when we do the state fair for 11 consecutive days, we can do it the way the performer wants to do it. And I think that's just an incredibly important message. And Pro wrestling's for the people, and who are the people? We're still finding out, right? So it's about creating those different styles, and that's what you guys have done right with your territory. So NWA New Mexico, which is Duke City Championship Wrestling, is now the 7th official territory of the National Wrestling Alliance. The other 6 got heat, my man. Like I've done my homework. Like the biggest names in the country, like drawing fabulous crowds, like tons of reaction. Can you guys kind of talk about, Joe, can you talk about what you look for in territories and different ways to spotlight the NWA talent?
Well, I think it has to come from the top down. I think that's what's important. We got to find really good leadership. And I feel like, there's, some of the quote unquote smart fans, or perhaps people who are running independent promotions that want to be territories, kind of scowled at the first few that we picked, because we picked a lot of the ones that came sort of internally. We have World League Wrestling out of St. Louis, which is Leland Race, but also Trevor Murdoch helps run that as well. NWA Chicago with Brian Idol, of course, and Billy Corgan's really hands-on with that territory. But Exodus Pro in Cleveland, run by EC3, and NWA JCP with Joe Kazana. These are all people that are connected with the NWA, and so it's hard for us to find places and build a level of trust that we can have with certain organizations. There's plenty of territories out there, or independent promotions, that are doing gangbuster business, and they're having lots of people come, and they're selling lots of tickets, but perhaps they're not a good fit for where we're at and what we're trying to accomplish at that time. So it's interesting. We've actually developed a questionnaire of like a bunch of different things that we ask different promotions that have requested and wanted us to take a look at. I think I've probably gotten an email from almost every single independent promotion in America, several in Europe, a few in Japan, and several in Australia. So I think that kind of goes to show, without people, going out and publicly saying that they like what the NWA is doing and they want to be a part of what the NWA is doing, I can see it because they've reached out to us and they want to have that sort of connection. And so it's kind of difficult for us to go through and really try to figure out where we need to be and where certain territories need to be. But, I think it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of it. I think it's great that I've got one in my backyard with Dog Pound Championship Wrestling as part of NWA Texas. And so, it's really interesting that we've been able to grow in the way that we have.
A lot of the questions we get as you're talking about that growth is not just the partnership with the NWA, but it's the partnership with those other territories, right? Because as you, Joe, are talking about, like, guys that have worked internally for the NWA and their promotions in their different regions of the country, we have not had that. I think we were the first like non-NWA official partner to become one, and it was kind of interesting to us because that process, it was a long time coming. It took us maybe 8 months to kind of get to where we wanted to be. And that was 8 months of what? Due diligence, right? That's 8 months of, we came out to you in Tampa. Like, you guys came out here to New Mexico. It was making sure we were exploring each other the way that any two individuals should do, during a courtship. And at the end of it, I don't know if we learned more on our end, or I don't know if you guys learned more about Southwest Wrestling on your end, but I'm gonna tell you the combination that led us to this joint endeavor. This wasn't the NWA say, hey, you're going to do exactly this. And this wasn't us saying we'd like to do exactly this. It was, how can we combine these two concepts into one ideal that will work? And the collaboration there was top tier. So it's obviously Brian Idol, it's Natalia Markova, was able to sit down with Billy Corgan and work the deal, which was incredibly kind of him to afford us that time. And then you guys with I don't know what other word to say here, olive branch of consideration, Hobo Hank's wrestling in an NWA ring against the Gimp, and you're doing commentary over the top of it. And everyone in New Mexico is losing their stuff in the positive, and everyone in 49 other states has no idea who Hobo Hank is. And I'm in love with it. Like, it's my absolute favorite professional highlight. Calling Hobo Hank's match, what was that for you, Joe? Was that as fun and weird as anything you've ever done?
It's interesting, and I'll share a very personal story.
Yeah.
And I think that there was a thing that I love is, I'm going all the way back years and years and years ago, before social media was a big deal and all that sort of stuff. When I started in professional wrestling, and I started in pro wrestling with my best friend, who's still my best friend. His name is Brandon Taylor. He wrestles under the name Robert Baines now. Okay. But when we first started out in professional wrestling, you're trying to figure out a gimmick. You're trying to figure out what you can do to be different. he wanted to wrestle as the hobo. And so he spent years wrestling as the hobo, and he kind of started his whole career and how you work in professional wrestling as the hobo. So like in having Hobo Hank there, it kind of brought back all these fond memories of me taking my first hip toss, and having my first matches in front of, friends and family at the wrestling school that we were at in Los Angeles. So that was what was really kind of special to me. And I guess that's really kind of only me that would have that connection to it. But I think it's fun. And I think that that's the other thing too, is, there's some people out there who criticize some stuff in professional wrestling, and they think that it needs to be, John Cena versus Batista, and that's it. Or,
that's it.
Every match has to be Dean Malenko and Rey Mysterio, and it's got to be technical and all this. There's room for all these different flavors there. There's room for all of these different things that we can do to entertain fans and to really hook people in. And I've always been a fan of the lighter side of professional wrestling. I think a lot of people would call it gaga, that sort of stuff. And there's a lot of money to be made with that sort of stuff too, because it's just really fun. And so like you could definitely have the top of your card. You're going to have your Tom Latimer versus EC3 in a steel cage going at it. And it'll be probably one of the best professional wrestling matches you have there. But if every match is that, then there's it would be like having a 4-course meal and every one of those courses is the steak.
Yeah.
It makes sense. You have to have the different flavors that get you there. So when you have Gags the Gimp versus Hobo Hank, it gives people something really interesting and different to see. And I think it's so incredibly fun. And it's really fun to be able to put, matches like that up on our YouTube channel. If it doesn't fit into the storyline arcs that you're going to see on NWA Powered, there's so many different like places you could put content for people to enjoy. And, a lot of people have sort of, they have this negative connotation that the NWA has abandoned YouTube because we don't put power on it anymore. But I think it's exactly the opposite. What we've done, instead of putting on these long, 45-minute to an hour episodes, we're going to give you shorter individual matches. And what we've found in looking at the algorithms, and I think all the other places like TKO and AEW found out the same thing. That's how people want to enjoy wrestling on that platform. It's got to be something under 15 minutes. It's got to be something with some really identifiable and different characters. And that's the kind of stuff that's going to get shared the most. One of our most popular videos on the NWA YouTube channel is Eric Smalls versus Rolando in a ladder match. And for people who don't know, Eric Smalls is a little person.
Yeah.
So, it's so why is that the number one thing when you've got matches with Camille, matches with Tom, matches with EC3, matches with Tyrus, who has this incredible following on social media because of what he does on Fox.
Correct.
You think those would all be the number one video, but it's not. It's the match that a lot of people would, smart fans, quote unquote, might turn their nose up at, and they just want to see wrestle, 15 minutes of super competitive stuff with athletes, but we could give you something different and something interesting and something that people really want to see.
Well, and there's something to be said too about the guys that do enjoy spot. There's like, I think that's a style and it super works. Like I never ever want to condemn that. We got a couple of tag teams that are really, really good at it. And the crowd, if I start the show off with those guys, because obviously there's a psychology to how you build a show out, that crowd's going to remain hot the entire night. Yeah. And it's incredible we have it. And then if you do and this was the match that Gags the Gimp and Hobo Hank had in the NWA, where I don't think they did a wrestling move. I think it was all strikes. I think it was all adventure. And it's
and there was some other stuff there. Pity City is one heck of a wrestling move. I'd tap out to that move.
Oh, that's so funny.
But you're right though. And at the same point, if you were to come to Hard Times 5 in Dothan, Alabama, or one of our other shows that we're going to be announcing soon, you're going to get all those different flavors, and you could get a match like Gags the Gimp versus Hobo Hank might be one of them, but another one of them might be Alexander Misery versus Colby Carino, and you're going to get all those crazy spots, and they're going to dive off the balcony, and they're going to do all kinds of crazy stuff that you're going to gasp at. So that's what's great about the NWA is we can cater to pretty much everybody that enjoys professional wrestling at any level. You'll enjoy all of our matches throughout the whole show.
Joe Galli has joined me in the opening segment of Going Over. We're going to grab a commercial break, and whenever we get back, regular host Saleh Taylor will join us for the rest of the show. Listen to Going Over at 95.9 FM and AM 610, the Sports Animal. Saleh, welcome.
Thank you. Hello.
Saleh, hello. How are you?
I'm grateful, sir. How you doing? How you feeling, sir?
I am living the dream. Was it 21 Pilot shirt? What are we wearing today?
It's 24. It's
Oh, I know that. Yeah, that's cool. I like
it. Thank you.
The Saleh is part of every Samoan family tree in wrestling. So
well, there is only one. They're all connected.
He's the
small island, big people.
Oh.
Yes, and big people. Yeah.
Here we go.
That's why they're stars.
5, 4. Welcome back to the program. Welcome back to Going Over. Saleh Taylor is alongside me. So is Joe Galli. We were talking the world of pro wrestling. We're talking NWA New Mexico. And we were talking, the best coast and the East Coast coming together to bring pro wrestling across it. All right, Joe, you're with us. You're the voice of the NWA. You got a ton of stuff coming up. We're not announcing anything we can't announce, but Dothan, Alabama is going to be the business, my friend. I'm going to go out there and try to be a part of supporting you guys. Excited to be a venture in that. As I've told everyone, they've said, why Dothan? It's hard for me to explain how it's like a hotbed. Like, talk about how this artsy city becomes like a pro wrestling mecca for one weekend a year.
You know, it's interesting. And if you look at our calendar, it's more than one weekend a year. I think we actually go back there 3 times during the year. Yeah, I think we do. And one of the reasons for that is there is a ravenous fan base of people who want to see pro wrestling. And for the past 20 something years, that part of the world, for whatever reason, has been ignored.
Yeah.
You've got a lot of people that would have, if they want to go to a SmackDown taping or an AEW taping, they got to go to Huntsville. They've got to go to Montgomery. They've got to go to New Orleans. They got to go to Atlanta. Whereas we're going to bring the mountain to Muhammad, as you can say. So we're going to bring it to there. They have a fantastic venue, the Dothan Civic Center, which is connected to their opera house as well. And it's really interesting that you could see this, especially in parts of the South that have struggled socioeconomically for so long, that they're making these big changes and they're making these big investments, especially into entertainment. And it's allowing them to get a lot more as far as tourism dollars go, and a lot more investment from a lot of, outside entities. And that's what's going to allow these towns like Dothan, I'm sure there's plenty of maps of the United States that don't show Dothan on it. It's a small place. I live in a suburb of San Antonio, and my suburb of San Antonio that I live in has a higher population than the city of Dothan, Alabama. So there's not a ton of people there, but it's changing. And you could look at the dynamics of the landscape throughout the entire United States, and I'm sure that you guys see it in places like Albuquerque and Santa Fe. You probably got a lot of people coming into town driving Teslas with California license plates looking for places to live. There's a lot of big shift where they want to get away from these big cities, whether it's because of crime, whether it's because of taxes, whether it's because it's just too expensive, whether because there's a lack of housing, and there's moving into it. So I think we hit at this perfect time where we have an enormous demand for entertainment in this town. They're a growing town, and it's a town that's welcomed us to the point to where their board of tourism, Visit Dothan, is one of our main sponsors there. Because they see the value in us coming to town. And it's not just, we're bringing a crew of 120 people and they're going to need hotels and we're going to eat at restaurants. We're going to do all that. It's about bringing an entire country's eyes that are into professional wrestling are going to see this town. And if you look at any of the stuff that, is currently airing on NWA Power on X, or the stuff that we did the first time there when we first held Hard Times in Dothan, Alabama, you're going to see a ravenous group of fans that are there. And I think what's actually really great about when we go to Dothan, Alabama in particular, we always strive to have a family-friendly environment when it comes to our professional wrestling. But in Dothan, for whatever reason, people are bringing the kids. They're just grabbing all the kids. I think part of it's also we have an affordable show. Like, I don't know how much it costs to go to the Royal Rumble. I'm guessing an arm, a leg, and your first sport. If you want a decent seat, it's expensive stuff. So we try to make an affordable thing so that people can, if they got 3-4 kids, they can come. And they're just up against the guardrail and they're screaming, they're having a good time. And to me, like, you're looking at that and it's so different than what you're seeing on some of the other nationally televised wrestling where everybody's just kind of in their seats. But if you go back and you start looking at Jim Crockett promotions in the late 80s and they're, doing some big show somewhere, there's kids, there's families, everybody's going crazy. They're up against the rail. They're yelling at the heels. They're cheering for the baby faces. And so it's this whole landscape there where we're so welcomed into that community. And we really want to showcase that community in what we're doing there and to showcase our professional wrestling there. It's this perfect marriage. And that's why we're so successful there in that particular town. And that's why I'm happy that we could keep coming back and they keep welcoming us back to the Dothan Civic Center.
You're making an interesting point about Visit Dothan. You're making an interesting point about the tourism aspect, right? Because New Mexico, I think the two things we do absolute better than any other state is, number one, our spectacles. The Balloon Fiesta, I think we just got the numbers the other day through my news feed or whatever, but they brought in 825,000 people. And of those 825,000 people for the 10-day long Balloon Fiesta, 500 something thousand said they were solely there for the fiesta. And then on top of that, Sally, did you see it was like $22 million or something they brought in? It was something crazy, right? So there's that. And then the State Fair drew over 500,000 last year. The New Mexico Bowl drew over 60,000 last year. The Big Enchilada, which is this huge softball tournament that we have down south, it draws 25,000 people. You have all these like destination tourism events, and then our other one is our arm's length leadership. Like we have access, like I could go to the governor's office right now. I could go to any state legislator, any rep. Our arm's length access to our leadership, and then their efforts to bring individuals from outside our community into it sounds very similar to what you're describing in Alabama. And I think that's why like pro wrestling has started to thrive here in the Southwest over the course of this last 2 years since we've been doing Duke City Championship Wrestling. In this upcoming summer, not to give anyone's dates about anything, but this year, Duke City Championship Wrestling, NWA Wrestling, AEW Wrestling, WWE Wrestling, they will all be in the state of New Mexico. And I think that's the first time in the history of this entire state that has happened. And like, that's incredible to me, that how mainstream this art has become and how states are recognizing the emphasis and effort it needs. So yeah, super good point that you're given from Alabama, because it strongly relates here to New Mexico.
Well, New Mexico, you guys also have a leg up, I believe, and maybe it's just me, but your natural surroundings are second to none. I mean, it's an absolutely gorgeous state. I went there once for a wedding a number of years ago, and a few of my friends, I believe they were working for KQRE. Is that one of the stations out there? TV stations?
KRQE.
Yeah, they were working there, and they got married up in Santa Fe, and it's like, wow, this place is gorgeous.
Sally's KRQE, proud supporter of the Boys and Girls Club of Central New Mexico. Let's go.
There you go.
Sally?
Yeah, so as we have Duke City Championship Wrestling joining the territory leagues, there's 7 now. Well, I got Midwest, Exodus, Southeast, Jokazana, Crossfire, Chicago, World League in Texas. What are the expectations of the territories as we're rebuilding this territory system? What is expected of Duke City Championship Wrestling as we're joining this?
Well, I think what we're expecting is what you're already doing. You're putting on great shows. You've got some amazing talents. And I think one of the things that people don't really understand from the outside looking in is there's a lot of people that run professional wrestling in kind of the word that comes to mind is carny. They're very carny in a way.
That's me.
Yeah. Well, and there's a certain level. There's a certain level that you could get to with it. And some people are way too carny, and you don't want to deal with it. Even if they're having a good show, even if there's people that are coming out to see them, they might not be the best business partner, but they might not be the best person to invest in. And so that's what I always look into, is these territory systems are investments in the future of the NWA. And I think, if you go back and you start looking at when we first started doing these, we only had JCP and we only had Exodus, and then we had Chicago. And then you started to see this real interesting shift in the way that WWE was starting to do things, to where they've gotten to the point where they now have the WWE ID system. And I'm not saying that they copied us. It's not a revolutionary idea, but it is interesting that they started doing something very similar to what we were doing after the fact, because it was successful. And I think one of the biggest things for me personally is I love the fact that we're really getting good exposure to some incredible talent that we might not otherwise do it. We get, especially our head of talent relations, he's getting emails and text messages and DMs 100 times a day from all over the world.
Yeah.
And you just get lost in the sauce at that point. And maybe there is the next Shawn Michaels in that email, but you might not be able to see it yet. And it's so difficult to go through and do it on an individual basis. But when we have a territory and we have a group of guys that are there, it allows us to take a closer look and actually see where we are. So I think that's the biggest thing right now is being able to not only support professional wrestling in your area, in Albuquerque, in New Mexico, and bring some of our talent in, guys like Brian Idol, Natalia Markova, and I'm sure you're going to have plenty more. If I could do a pitch, I would love to pitch our NWA Mid-America champion, Jeremiah Plunkett.
Yep.
He has been defending that championship all over the country, and he's actually got a jacket with a patch of every single state. I don't think I've seen New Mexico on it yet, so I think that would be interesting if he could go there. Or perhaps he could go there and one of your great wrestlers that are there could take that championship from him. So there's always these opportunities that are there, that exist, and it allows the NWA to find those diamonds in the rough that we might not have otherwise seen. And a great example of that would be guys like Thrillbilly Silas Mason, who went all the way up to being our NWA National Heavyweight Champion, and is in the middle of the most bitter feud with Brian Idol, breaking his collarbone in Dothan, Alabama. Yeah. And now they're going to have a grudge match, and God only knows what other bones are going to get broken at that point. So, it's guys like that, guys like Dante Casanova out of NWA Chicago, guys like Soda Pop out of Dog Pound Championship Wrestling, which is part of NWA Texas, guys like Bam Bam Malone. I'm naming a lot of people that your viewers probably don't know who they are now, but because of our territory system and us being able to identify their talents, then we can hopefully get it to the point where they become the household name.
Yeah, you're obviously talking about Brian Idol, who is currently our Route 66 champion, took that title from Mr. Happy, did that at Comic-Con last January, and that was because Solly Taylor is a cheater.
What? I just needed, I like seeing things in 3D. I had the best seats in the house, man.
Yeah, arm's length from disaster. That's what you are all the time.
Thank you. Thank you.
Joe Galli is with us. We're talking the NWA. We're talking the territory system. We're about as far west as it gets outside of states that touch the ocean. And after the announcement, Joan, this is going to come as no surprise to you, the amount of California and Oregon and Washington and Arizona area codes that called your boy was through the roof. Talk about how hotbed the West Coast, the best coast is as it relates to creating pro wrestlers.
Well, I will certainly, as a current resident of the great state of Texas, yes. Texas is wonderful and all, but I am born and bred in the 818 of Southern California, Los Angeles. So go Dodgers till I die.
Okay, weird sentence like that. I did not like that sentence.
I'm sorry. We all have our faults, and that one's mine.
Yep.
But I came up in Southern California, and there's some incredible wrestlers that have come from Southern California, and you don't need to just look at, the folks that are in New Mexico or the folks that, you see in the NWA. You can look at the grander scheme of things, and I believe there's two vice presidents of a very successful professional wrestling company that come from Rancho Cucamonga. Who I remember being on matches or having matches on the same card as them. They were in the main event, and I was jerking the curtain and looking up at the lights. And this is a million years ago. So, it's great to see those guys, especially the ones that I know personally. There's a lot of great wrestlers that, come from Southern California that have been in the business for a long time and really have made a name for themselves. That, I consider really deep friends, and I really enjoy working with them and talking to them. Even if they're not in the NWA, it's still nice to be able to just correspond on Instagram or whatever. And so there's tons of dudes out there that come from there that are, I think that they're at such a high level, guys like Pretty Peter Avalon and Bad Dude Tito. And, there's lots of other names that I could keep dropping right here. But I think it's interesting in particularly where I came from in Los Angeles, it was a real struggle to kind of break out for a lot of guys. Mm-hmm. And I think because it's Los Angeles and there's just so much going on in that town at any time, there's no way to get that level of focus. Whereas if you go to some places where it's not the hustle and bustle of the second largest city in the world, or in the United States, I should say, then you can kind of get that. You can get that level of attention, and then you start to be able to snowball your professional wrestling career. It makes things a little bit easier. Ironically, right? Everybody else, they want to move from, Dothan, Alabama to go to Los Angeles to make a name for themselves because they think that that's the way to go. But the way things are changing in this world, you could really stay in the smaller communities, and with the internet and with the backing of different organizations out there, you could become a star.
Yeah. And you're making good notes on the amount of talent there, but it's talented different than it is throughout the country. Like a West Coast wrestler is not a Midwest wrestler. A West Coast wrestler is not an East Coast wrestler. A West Coast wrestler is not a Southern border luchador style wrestler. Like they have their own world, right? And it's so interesting to me to see their style come in and go up against guys that learned elsewhere and kind of watch how they navigate that in the ring. Do you notice that as strongly as I do as you're pairing talents from across the country? Do you notice the different approaches to pro wrestling and then how they congeal?
I do, but I don't think it's a geographic thing. I don't.
Okay.
It might be, and that's a good way to look at it. And because we all have different lens and aspects of what we're seeing things, I think it actually has a lot more to do with where you're getting your training at, which I guess could be based on regionals. Like if you go to Southern California, one of the top places there is Santino Brothers. There's a lot of great guys that come out of the Santino Brothers. They were sort of, when I was in wrestling school, there was the competition with us. But my school failed, but Santino's is still there and it's been around for a long time. So I think it's a lot of it has to do with where you go and you get your training. So if you were to take Dr. Tom Pritchard, who has his stuff and his training in the Mid-Atlantic area, you could say that that's a Mid-Atlantic style that he teaches. But if Tom Pritchard packed up and moved to Dubai and was teaching wrestling in Dubai, he'd be teaching that same style of wrestling. So does Dubai wrestling become that? Or is it because you're learning from somebody that has a certain approach to it? So in the same way that you're going to get people that are training with Brian Idol and Natalia Markova in Tampa, if he were to have a training seminar in Denver, Colorado, the principles and what he's trying to teach and the way that you can execute professional wrestling effectively is essentially going to be the same. So I think it has probably more to do with what you're learning and who you're learning from, as opposed to exactly where you are in the world. But maybe there's something to it. If you take a look also, Billy Corgan, runs the NWA. He also has a great podcast right now. And he was, having conversations with the folks like the incredible rock stars that come out of Chicago. What's in the water? Why was everybody coming out of Chicago at the same time? Why was everybody coming out of the Pacific Northwest with Nirvana at that time? Like what was happening geographically in that area, So there's probably something to it as well. I don't exactly know. But there's probably definitely some level of, and I don't know what it is. It's hard to encapsulate what could be a regional style and how it differs, as opposed to where you were educated, how much work you're putting in, and how much dedication you have to your character and your effectiveness as a professional wrestler.
We're getting a bunch of wise words from a wise man, and whenever we get back, we'll continue this conversation. You're listening to Going Over on 95.9 FM and AM 610, the Sports Animal. Welcome back to the program. Welcome back to Going Over. Joe Galli is our guest. He is the voice of the National Wrestling Alliance. Solly Taylor is with us, and we hate it.
You're welcome.
I don't hate it, especially that wonderful dog I saw running in the background. I'm a dog fan. I'm sorry.
I didn't know I had a dog. I got a dog.
Surprise, surprise.
Sorry, Sally. Time of recording is Thursday, the 27th, airing terrestrially on March the 1st. Welcome to March, everyone. Sally.
Ooh, the Ides of
it feels right, man. It's coming. Joe, I got a question for you, my friend. So when you continue on training, how important is it for someone to continue on with their trainer, or even like to get some diversity in different styles of training? How, like, for someone who's on their journey right now?
I think it's paramount. You have to do it. You have to get that exposure, and there's many different ways to do it. I mean, you could go to different seminars, you could learn from different guys, or you could just travel. I mean, there's plenty of people that just pack their bags and, they'll go, and that's a very old school way of doing it, where I'll go and I'll wrestle, Texarkana area. I'll do that for a while. And when that run feels like it's done, you feel like you've gotten the most out of that, you pack your bags and you go to the Northeast. And then you start exposing yourself to different people and working with different wrestlers and coming up with different ideas and finding different storylines. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can do it, but I think it's imperative. You cannot just stay in one place and wrestle the same in front of the same crowd all the time and expect to have extreme longevity and extreme success. Now, that being said, you could become that local hero that just stays in that one town and everybody loves you and you're the king of that town. But you're going to have the same match every time. You're probably going to have it against the same people all the time. And there's going to be a law of diminishing returns with that. So if your goal is to be, a main member on the NWA or to get signed by WWE or AEW or to go to Japan, then you need to diversify what you're doing. You need to work more people and you need to get more exposure. And I feel like with social media and all of that exists now, it makes things a lot easier for you to have that access and to try to find people that can get you your foot in the door and to have some dark match and to do all that. And, but the tried and true way of doing it is really just showing up. I think that's the one thing that's so unique about wrestling is there's no other sport or professional business in the world where you could just kind of keep showing up and eventually someone will give you a shot. And if you could pull it off in that moment, you might be able to get a position. It doesn't work. I can't go up to Arlington and just keep showing up and hope that at some point, if I just get there and I can pay my dues, I'll be on the Cowboys. Like I might get a job there. I might be able to do something with the company, but I'm not going to play on that field. And wrestling is different in the way that you still have an opportunity to do that. If you have the dedication, if you're very humble at the very beginning, if you're willing to listen and you're willing to work hard, and it opens that door and you have that possibility.
In a ownership position and a leadership position, I'm really struggling with one message. I'm going to ask you guys for a little insight on this. How do I tell every performer to stop wearing black? They're all obsessed with the black singlet. They're all obsessed with the black trunks. They're all obsessed with the all black everything. Like right. I need to get this message over that color is important.
Okay. I think this might help. Right here, as I try to make analogies that exist in the real world.
Yeah.
They're all wearing black, right? What else is all black? What else is all black? The night sky. But when you look at the night sky, what are you really looking for? The stars.
Light. Yeah, okay.
Looking for the stars. Do you want to be a star? Then you can't wear all black, otherwise you just blend into the nothing. You have to shine, and part of that shining is you don't have to dress like Attitude Era Stone Cold.
Yeah.
He did it and it was great and it worked for him. But you can definitely find ways to stand out and be different. And I think being colorful is one of the things that if you go to the NWA, go to our website, nationalwrestlingalliance.com, and you click the shop button and you look at our merchandise, it's difficult to find a black shirt. We don't have a lot. We've got a few. But the vast majority of the stuff that we try to sell to people is in color. Because guess what? People want that. And it also makes things easier when you go to a town like Dothan, Alabama. You could have a shirt that's in that crimson tide and you'll sell a bunch of them. So come out and wearing that color. And you know who else was a great example of this? And, isn't the cornerstone of his success, but it was definitely a part of it in the very beginning, is John Cena. John Cena had a different color for everything. He had every sports team color. He could come out and he could either, if he was working as a babyface in Miami, he's wearing Dolphins colors. If he was a heel coming out in there, he could wear different team's colors. And then you immediately get a reaction from people just based off the color that they're seeing. So I think that's what I would impose is you want to be a star. And do you want to be a star like John Cena? Well, this is what he did. So maybe you want to try to do something like that. So that is what I would impress upon people. And then, the other side of it is like, I don't know who gets into pro wrestling, like to be black and serious and brooding. I want to get into pro wrestling to be Ric Flair. Like I want to ride the limousine. I want to have the diamond ring. I want to have trouble keeping these alligators down, and you don't do that if you're in a black tights with your name on your butt.
The guys love their name on their butt.
I appreciate it as a commentator, especially if you're new and I've got a whole bunch of new guys wrestling on some show and I don't know exactly what you are. That's super helpful for me.
That
so
was
some sort of identification is good.
I could do the Rick Rude thing and have their wives' faces on my front side of my tights.
There you go.
I could do that. Yeah.
It works out well. There's still guys who do variations of that too. So
yeah, so good.
Duke City Championship Wrestling started in May of 23, and the only like emphasis I had on the whole very first live event was I needed a TV that had our wrestlers' pictures and our wrestlers' names, because the crowd doesn't know who anyone is, and we're like putting so much work into making sure we have like these cards up there to making sure like people know who to root for and who to cheer for. It was like the most subconscious thing, because now we don't have to tell anyone his name is Mr. Happy. Right. Like everyone knows he's Mr. Happy. He's not the clown. He's not the clown guy. He's not it. He's not he's Mr. Happy. Like there's zero confusion here. And it's that reiteration. We got a all right, Solly we do a live stream on this, and Solly puts up the one comment about him. Like there's hundreds of comments over here, and you cherry pick the one.
I'm so humble. I'm very humbled.
We got about 6 minutes left here, Joe. And I think the question, not just us, but all the friends of the show and fans of Duke City Championship Wrestling want to know is, at the end of it, at the end of the NWA Duke City Championship Wrestling Partnership Territorial Alliance, both companies are successful if what happens, Joe?
That's a great question. I think we're on a great path on it right now. And granted, we're just getting started as you know, the partnership that's there. Consistency, I think, is a good thing. I think it's important that you, as the leader of Duke City, you keep running the quality shows that you are. So I highly recommend anybody who's watching this or listening to this, go out to your shows, because not only are you going to see the great talent that y'all have, but you're probably going to start seeing a lot more NWA talent. And selfishly, I will say they are the best of the best in the sport of professional wrestling. So you're really going to be entertained. You're really going to enjoy it, and you're going to get the best bang for your buck. So I think consistency is key. I think delivering messages to people and content to people in ways that are, you know, set for 2025 is important. So you've got to lean into the digital side of things. You've got to make sure that you're making good content on your reels, on your TikTok, and all of that sort of stuff, because there is a way that people might get first introduced to a lot of stuff too. So I think that that's important, is to have a good digital presence. And at the end of the day, it's just consistently making good shows with strong storylines and great professional wrestlers. And of course, that great professional wrestlers could mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But as you said at the top of the show, you know, wrestling, it's like Baskin Robbins. There's 31 flavors, baby. Everything's different, but they're all good. And I think that that's what's really key.
I think from the perspective of NWA New Mexico Duke City Championship Wrestling, if we're able to be a spotlight on a lot of that talent in the Southwest, if we're able to be a spotlight on a lot of that talent on the West Coast, and I'm not there yet, I'm being able to figure out, my audience claims to love luchador wrestling. When we provide it, it doesn't get the reaction that I expect it to. Like, I want to learn how to do that well. And then I want the NWA to be able to see those things. I want the NWA to be able to see Pretty City Express. I want the NWA to be able to see Turbo Test. I want the NWA to be able to see some of these talents down here. So if all we can be is and I don't believe it's going to be all, but if at minimum, if we can be the spot that is lit by the NWA beacon, like how fortunate we will be to expose what I believe to be some of the best talent that's not quite at the NWA level yet, to be exposed to that national audience. Because I think we looked it up on Sunday. This is a name never introduced to the show, but Paul texts me and he says, "Hey, Google Analytics says you're number 4 right now, brother. Like, you're behind WWE, AEW, NWA, and now it's you guys." And I go, what the heck? The NWA rub is real. Like, the NWA rub is the coolest thing that I've seen in professional wrestling, because we do have relationships with those other companies, but the rub hasn't been the same, and it's been kind of a eye-opening experience to get that fan base from the NWA and their passion.
Yeah, and it's not just the fan base too. You get a lot of people out there that are passionate about pro wrestling and have been involved in pro wrestling or fans of pro wrestling for a long time. Paul being one of those sorts of people. And, you know, the NWA, just those 3 letters and just that brand carries so much weight. Yeah. Because of the lineage that's there. You know, we're going on 77 years. And there's a reason for it. And we're not stopping. And there's a lot of people out there who might think the glory days of pro wrestling and the glory days of the NWA, that was the 70s and 80s, early 90s, and it's done. I couldn't disagree more. I think we're on an incredible upswing, and we've done some really great stuff so far, and the best is yet to come. And part of that ability for us to do that is the partnerships that we have with our different territories, like New Mexico and the other ones, and ones that could be coming down the pipe as well.
Solid.
I got one last question for you, my friend. As we're now competing with with 6 other territories and trying to work towards the big stage, the big show, what are some advice that you would have for the guys in our locker room? How can they best stand out? How can they best serve the show working towards the big show?
I think one of the great things that I like to see, and sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't, and I think people might be worried about backlash for it or something like that. I like to see the jabs online. I like when we do our podcast, I'll plug this right. This is the NWA, which is a podcast that airs on all of the NWA social channels, 7 o'clock Eastern. I'm not exactly sure where this mountain is at. 5 Mountain, 5 o'clock Mountain, 5 o'clock Mountain. It's an hour-long show, and all we do is talk about the NWA. Well, a lot of the territories have their own social media accounts, and they'll just start feuding with each other about which one's the best, who could beat who, and all this other. And I think it springs a lot of conversation, and I think it helps fans to kind of see it. And it's weird, like, to say, "Hey, tell your boys to go online and be a troll," but there is something to it that I think, at least maybe I just find it interesting. I just think it's fun that you can have those conversations, because that's something you could have never done before. That just would not have happened in the original territory system because of the technology didn't exist at that point, but it does now. So have some fun with it, and also be ready, because if you take a look at our catalog, we have a show that we don't have on the calendar yet for this year, but could come very soon. That was called Back to the Territories. And that's when all the territories had matches, and they all had representation. They went and quote unquote invaded NWA JCP in Knoxville. And, their people keeping score. They got scorecards. Our guy won this. Our guy won that. Our guy did that. And I think it's really interesting to do that and be able to showcase that on NWA Power as well. So I think that is the best thing, is to, when we have the opportunity to kind of get there and have another Back to the Territory, maybe we could do that from Albuquerque. Who knows? You guys could have home court advantage. I don't know. So I just think it would be really interesting to have that, especially with the way that it's grown, because at this point we've added, 2 or 3 more territories since the last time we had that show. So I think that would be really fun too.
So we're going to war with Texas and Chicago. We're going to war with Texas and Chicago.
You could. Also,
they can't handle the elevation. Everyone knows that. That's
exactly.
Especially here in San Antonio, it's pretty flat. We're not very high up here.
Ale, I need your final words, brother.
I'm grateful for your time, Joe. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your perspective. I really do appreciate you. Thank you so much. And Fred, whatever, dude.
Yeah, same.
Anytime, fellas.
Joe Galli, on behalf of the NWA, thank you.
Thank you.
Boys, another great episode of Going Over. For myself, Fred Slow, for Sally Taylor, for Joe Galli. Good job, everyone. Keep breathing.